This is VOA Africa.
Good evening, I'm Esther Gidoyuat. It's Tuesday, June 18th. This is Africa 54. The spread of Ebola from the Democratic Republic of Congo to Uganda triggers a slowdown of cross-border trade. There's a new migrant surge at the U.S.-Mexico border, this one from Central Africa. And the World Health Organization issues a surprising declaration about a dreaded disease. We'll explain. The Ebola virus has crossed from the Democratic Republic of Congo into Uganda. As Halima Thumani reports from the Ugandan town of Bwera, the often deadly disease has not only claimed 2 lives in Uganda, but it's bringing trade along the border region to a virtual halt.
Businessman Penge Kis has been importing fish for the last 15 years from Uganda into eastern Congo. But for the last week, Kis says he's had little choice but to stay in Uganda because of the Ebola outbreak that crossed the border.
Kinshasa, we don't know Ebola, but when you get here at the border, wash hands, wash hands, wash hands. And when I got here, we've worked 3 days. In Congo, there's no business. They say there's Ebola, so we have to sit and wait, and even all the banks are closed.
Motorcycle taxi driver Farouk Ayub says Ebola makes him afraid to enter Congo.
Normally, Congolese are the ones we transport mostly. We get them from Congo and take them to Uganda. But we are scared because of Ebola. So now we ask, we don't know how you can help advise us. How can we protect ourselves against Ebola?
Ugandan businessman Rafael Masereka says he and his colleagues are warning people not to shake hands with merchants from the DRC. Ebola is spread through contact with body fluids. The Uganda Red Cross is in charge of Ebola screening at all official entry points from the DRC. But Red Cross branch manager Natkunda Primrose says the danger is from those who cross the porous border where there is no screening.
So you don't know whether they've been in contact with a person who has Ebola, who has maybe attended a cultural function like burial, or maybe if through that process of trading, if they've managed to touch someone, a victim of Ebola.
Ugandan troops posted along the border have a mandate to check for illegal ammunition, but are not prepared to face, let alone fight Ebola.
They'll be vaccinated if we get where they are, but the only challenge we have in that is the question of follow-up, which we're trying to work on, because once you're given the vaccine, we need to follow you up for some time to ensure that everything is working okay with you, you don't have any problem.
The traders along the Uganda-DRC border can only hope the measures are enough to stop Ebola's spread so life can return to business as usual. Halima Othmani for VOA News, Wera, Uganda.
The political party of Egypt's former president Mohamed Morsi is calling for an international investigation into the circumstances surrounding his sudden death. Morsi's son Ahmed announced via Facebook that his father was buried Tuesday alongside other senior figures of the Muslim Brotherhood in Cairo. Morsi, the country's first democratically elected head of state, who was later ousted from power, collapsed and died of a reported heart attack Monday while he was speaking at his espionage trial in Cairo. The Muslim Brotherhood's Freedom and Justice political party said in a statement published on its website that Egyptian authorities are responsible for Morsi's deliberate slow death.
Today, Dr. Mohamed Morsi is a hero martyr. The military regime is responsible for his blood. Those who imprisoned him unfairly and deprived him of medication and deprived him of contact with his family. What happened to Morsi is completely a crime, and we call for an international investigation into what happened.
Morsi was overthrown as president in 2013 by Egypt's military after mass protests against his rule. After his ouster, the former president was sent to prison, where he had been since 2013, and cracked down on Muslim Brotherhood. Amnesty International is calling for Egyptian authorities to conduct an impartial investigation into the circumstances of Morsi's death. Egypt's chief prosecutor says a forensic team will examine Morsi's body to determine the exact cause of his death. Sudan's protest leaders are calling for nighttime demonstrations and marches in Khartoum and elsewhere in the country beginning Tuesday amid a tense standoff with the ruling military over who should lead the transition after the ouster of the autocrat Omar al-Bashir. The protest leaders say they've begun, quote, revolutionary escalation to pressure the country's generals to hand over power to civilians and to condemn the military's violent dispersal of their sit-in in Khartoum earlier this month. Protest organizers say at least 128 people have died since the security forces cracked down on June 3rd, but the military-backed authorities maintain that 61 people died, including 3 members of the security forces. U.S. President Donald Trump is officially launching his re-election campaign Tuesday in the key battleground state of Florida. The president is hoping voters will reward him at the polls next year for the strong U.S. economy. But heading into the 2020 race, various polls show that Trump remains unpopular with a large swath of voters. VOA national correspondent Jim Malone reports.
Air Force One lands for a recent campaign rally in Pennsylvania, a key battleground state in the 2020 election that President Trump narrowly won in 2016. Trump sees the strong U.S. economy as his #1 advantage heading into next year's campaign.
Politics is a crazy world, but when you have the best employment numbers in history, when you have the best unemployment numbers in history, when you have the best economy probably that we've ever had, I don't know, how the hell do you lose this election, right?
A new TV ad by the Trump campaign, released on the eve of his re-election kickoff, reminds voters of his accomplishments.
And we will make America great again. Thank you.
Trump officially launches his re-election bid Tuesday in Florida and appears eager to take on whomever emerges from a crowded field of Democratic presidential contenders.
Vice President Joe Biden.
At the moment, former Vice President Joe Biden is the Democratic frontrunner with a sharp focus on criticizing Trump.
He's a threat, in my view, a threat to our core values. 4 years of Donald Trump will be viewed as an aberration in American history. 8 years will fundamentally change who we are as a nation and how we're viewed around the world.
Recent national and state polls have given Biden and several other Democrats an advantage in theoretical head-to-head matchups with the president. Trump also dismissed his own internal polling that showed him trailing Biden and some of the other Democrats in key states, often by wide margins. Presidential polls this early can be unreliable, according to ABC News contributor Matt Dowd.
As we saw in 2016's polls and the race can change suddenly. I think the president would be behooved to admit reality and to say he's behind and he hasn't been reaching out enough. But Democrats would also it's important for Democrats to understand polls can change suddenly, polls can change, and they don't often indicate where the American public is.
Despite the strong economy, Trump's approval rating is weak by historical standards, and it has remained consistently low for most of his presidency, says Larry Sabato.
If we simply restrict ourselves to public polls, then you could really say nothing's changed. Donald Trump has been in the upper 30s, low to mid 40s in virtually every survey during his entire presidency.
The polling suggests that while Trump has largely kept his political base happy, he will need to find a way to broaden his support if he wants to bolster his chances for 2020. Jim Malone, VOA News, Washington.
A record number of African migrants are now crossing the U.S.-Mexico border. During one recent week, Border Patrol agents in Texas' Del Rio sector stopped more than 600 African migrants. Most are from the DRC and Cameroon, while others are from Niger, Nigeria, and Somalia. The group is part of a small but increasing proportion of migrants from countries other than Mexico and Central America who slip into the southern United States without authorization. U.S. Customs and Border Patrol say one of the first groups entered the U.S. on May 30th, and that out of 116 people who came across the border, 80 were from Congo, 35 from Angola, and 1 from Cameroon. Now, for more perspective on this situation, VOA reporter Alzuma Compaore is standing by live in San Antonio, Texas. Good morning, Alzuma.
Good morning, Esther.
Now, I understand some of these African migrants have traveled for weeks and some even for months. What are they telling you?
Well, Esther, they're definitely telling us about that very perilous journey that they took, starting in Brazil and working their way up to Mexico and coming to the borders there, where they actually, have to endure a couple of, frustration all along the way. One of the most deadly part of the journey they're talking about is the Darien Gap, which is really, that's a gap where there's no roads, there's no actual place to go, and they have to go through that with families. Some of them have babies and women that are pregnant, and they have to, make sure that everybody gets, to the border safely.
Now,
that's what we've been hearing, and now.
Now, you mentioned that some of them are pregnant women, some are children. How are they coping? What kind of help are they receiving?
Well, we actually heard the story about this. We actually saw her. She arrived on the 5th of June, and the next day she had a C-section, and she had to go to the hospital and have the proper care. And now she's out there in the shelter that the city of San Antonio had to put together to welcome, at least to host those immigrants coming, mostly from, like you said, the DRC, but also from Angola, from Haiti, from Somalia, from Cameroon. And all of them here were able to actually get some help from local organizations like the Catholic Charities and the American Gateways, and also the Interfaith Coalition, who were able to actually make sure that they can get daily food and get a shelter, decent place where they can sleep at night. But all of that is getting busier and busier on the city, who is starting to feel the effect because they were not ready for that. They didn't have everything in place to welcome. They had to improvise a lot of these facilities for those immigrants.
Very quickly, Alzuma, have you spoken to the U.S. Border Patrol officials, and is there any chance at all that these immigrants may get some sort of legal status?
The legal status that they already have, Esther, is that all of them got a notice to appear, which means that they have to be checking with ICE every month while their asylum case is being processed. Well, that gives them, legal residency in the U.S. for the time being. But what is very, what the lawyers, the city is very worried about is to make sure that they understand that this is just the beginning of the process in the United States. A lot of them don't understand that. They feel like they made it to America and that's it. And then the language barrier is also something that they have to face. And that's why, they've launched a call to have more French speakers to come around, especially in the shelter where we're standing at now, to provide some translation so they can explain and make sure that they understand that this is just the beginning, and they have to be checking with the ICE, like I said, to remain legal until their case and the court date.
Well, Alzuma, thank you very much for reporting this for us. That's VOA's Alzuma Compaore reporting live from San Antonio, Texas. We're excited to hear what you think about Africa 54. Join the discussion on Facebook. The address is Africa 54. We're also streaming our broadcast live on Facebook. Please watch and share our show with your friends. Also check out our headlines 24/7 on voaafrica.com. Still to come, why didn't the World Health Organization declare Ebola a public health emergency? We'll be right back.
am Sheikh Sali, host and senior editor of VOA's international call-in talk show, Straight Talk Africa.
Today we'll examine the tobacco industry.
We pretty much touch on anything that you can think of. Politics, health issues, human rights issues, you name it, we talk about it. The issues that we discuss are pertinent to most people on the African continent. A very, very rare and unique opportunity to interact with their leaders.
The lyrics could be French,
English,
Portuguese,
Bantu,
Arabic.
It is the beat.
The African beat that counts.
The beat does all the translations.
It cuts across all languages and gives us the understanding that this is the African beat.
It is so distinct
and adhesive.
It binds us together.
African Beat on the Voice of America. For more information, visit our website at www.voanews.com/AfricanBeat.
I'm Clara Frank, and here's what's trending. It may look like trash to you, but to this Ivorian artist, discarded soda and beer cans make ideal materials for his work. After seeing cans floating in the river and lagoons around Abidjan, Wilfred Traoré felt inspired to educate people about the need for recycling and sustainable living through his art. After cutting the cans, he staples the cut pieces and hammers them out for a smooth finish. Each work uses about 2 or 3 sacks of cans, weighing around 50 kilograms each. With a population of about 5.5 million, Abidjan generates millions of tons of waste by households each year. Only 10% of that is recycled. Next up, Kenyan farmer Victor Kialo's chickens are doubling the number of eggs they're laying. The reason? Human excrement. He's feeding them food from a Nairobi-based organics recycling company. Sanergy harvests waste from toilets it operates in a franchise network in Nairobi's sprawling slums and feeds it to fly larvae, which become high-quality animal feed. As the world looks to feed 10 billion mouths by 2050, businesses harvesting insects, either for human consumption or as animal feed, are growing. They promote themselves as a greener alternative to traditional feeds such as soybeans, whose cultivation can lead to deforestation and the overuse of farm chemicals. In developing countries like Kenya, where the World Bank says nearly 2/3 of urbanites live in slums, feeding waste to fly larvae could solve both sanitation and nutrition problems.
Now, there's a lot of fake OJ accounts out there.
And finally, O.J. Simpson has launched a Twitter account with a video post in which the former football star says he's got a little getting even to do. Simpson has generally kept a low profile since his release from prison in October 2017 for robbery and kidnapping over an attempt to steal back some of his sports memorabilia from a Las Vegas hotel room. In the Twitter video, Simpson says his followers would get to read all his thoughts and opinions on just about everything. The 71-year-old recently told the Associated Press he was happy and healthy living in Las Vegas, 25 years after the killings of his ex-wife and her friend. And that's what's trending today.
It's time for our health report, and joining us now is Africa 54 health correspondent Lino Mudu with an update on Ebola. Lino.
That's right, Esther. Since early June, more than 300,000 people have fled inter-ethnic violence in northeastern Democratic Republic of Congo, complicating the tracing and treatment of patients at risk from Ebola, according to the United Nations aid agencies. Local officials say at least 161 people have been killed in the region in the past week in an apparent resurgence of ethnic clashes between farming and herding communities. As Congolese flee violence, fears are that more people will try to seek safety in Uganda. Ebola spread recently in Uganda and 2 people died. The World Health Organization has decided the Ebola epidemic in eastern DRC does not constitute a public health emergency of international concern. However, the expert committee warns lack of funding threatens to hamper the ability to contain the deadly virus.
As the displacement continues at this massive scale, fears are more people will try to seek safety in Uganda crossing Lake Albert. So far, the numbers that we have seen are really small, but it could pick up with around or more than 300,000 people now fleeing within the last 2 weeks. More people could be forced to flee across Lake Albert into Uganda.
The mobility of the population in North Kivu and in Ituri is a risk factor. So every time you have people moving in high numbers, it's more complicated to do the work on follow-ups, contact tracing, follow-up on people who are supposed basically to be observed for on a daily basis for 21 days.
Over 1,400 people have died from Ebola in eastern DRC, and over 2,100 are infected with the often fatal disease. Joining us for more on the Ebola outbreak in the DRC is Dr. Michelle Yao, Incident Manager for the response with the World Health Organization Africa region. Dr. Yao, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for giving us this opportunity.
Dr. Yao, the WHO said recently that the Ebola outbreak does not constitute a public health emergency. When we see that all indications point to the fact that things are not getting better, and also the outbreak spread to Uganda, what is the reason?
The reason is based mainly on all the preparedness activities that were done in surrounding countries. As we were expecting exportation of cases, we assessed the risk actually high for the neighboring countries. So preparedness helped to capture the cases very fast, and it helped also to have the appropriate intervention that limited actually the spread in Uganda. As I'm speaking, all the contacts in Uganda, more than 100, have been vaccinated, and health workers in Uganda also were vaccinated in advance. And most of the people that crossed actually were sent back to DRC for treatment purpose, as Uganda is also setting up the treatment capacity.
So how is the latest development in Uganda affecting the response in the DRC?
The latest development is for us is to ensure that we strengthen the control at the port of entry of the health point in terms of health screening, so that people that are symptomatic cannot cross. It's also to strengthen collaboration between the two countries. Actually, it's what helped to detect cases promptly, as the information was sent to DRC when we noticed that the people crossed the border. So this cross-border collaboration is critical. There is, as you mentioned during the emergency committee, one of the critical issues mentioned is the lack of funding for preparedness, but also funding for us to continue the operation in DRC. So we need to ensure that at least all the contacts are properly traced, that we can also provide the vaccination that is actually one of the critical means that we are using, and it's actually what helps us to contain the outbreak within the initial area of contamination. So all these interventions need to continue, and we really need more resources to do so.
And quickly, before we wrap, what are the strategic priorities then moving forward?
The strategic priority, we have actually changed the vaccination protocol to vaccinate faster, and also to be able to vaccinate quite a huge number of people, mainly having a geographical approach to limit the spread of the disease. So it's one of the critical things. The second one is to also use all the community leaders to sensitize the communities, because early detection is also based on full collaboration from the community. And we need to do it on both sides, in DRC as well as in neighboring countries, mainly in Uganda.
Okay, Dr. Yao, we have to leave it there. Thank you so much for joining us today. And that was Dr. Michelle Yao. He is Incident Manager for the response with the World Health Organization's Africa region. And thus, medical researchers at the University of Washington are asking video gamers to create tomorrow's medicines through a unique game called Foldit. Gamers are competing against each other to create new proteins, some of which could someday help save lives. VOA's Kevin Enox explains.
This is a game created by University of Washington medical researchers. It's called Foldit, and if it looks like a complicated 3D puzzle game, well, that's because that's exactly what it is.
Foldit is a free online computer game that anyone can play. We challenge Foldit players to design new proteins from scratch using state-of-the-art software that we use here at the Institute.
Proteins are long chains of amino acids that do all kinds of important things inside the human body.
Proteins are extraordinary molecules. They fold into very precise shapes and carry out complicated functions. Natural proteins have evolved to do this over billions and billions of years.
But when proteins fold in the wrong way, that can lead to everything from allergies to cystic fibrosis and Tay-Sachs disease. So to fight diseases such as these, researchers like University of Washington's Brian Kepnick need to figure out how proteins are supposed to fold. And that can stump even a supercomputer.
Protein design is a very expansive challenge. There are innumerable possibilities for designed proteins, and our algorithms can only explore a very, very small part of that space.
And that's where Foldit comes in. Gamers are asked to puzzle out how to fold proteins together to make them work correctly. The better the fold, the higher the score. Longtime players like Susan Kleinfelter can be just as good at folding proteins as the computer.
I keep a list of all the proteins that I design because I like to try and do different ones each time and not do the same ones over and over. But yeah, every time news would come out about a folded protein that passed some test, I would immediately go look up, is that one mine? Is it mine? Is that one mine?
Kepnick says players have gotten so good, researchers are now asking the estimated 75,000 players to create designer proteins that could treat diseases like HIV.
Right now, Foldit players are working on proteins that could be used to treat cancer or infectious disease or a whole host of other medical and materials applications.
If you're interested in playing, simply type fold.it in your browser and download the game. Kevin Enox, VOA News.
Proteins are...
And that's our health report for today. Esther, back to you.
Thank you very much, Lino. Be sure to join Lino Mudu every Tuesday for health reports. And that's our show for today. Watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. From all of us here in Washington, have a good evening.